What's up, everyone? I'm James Lynch, and this is Early Look, the show where I take a look at an upcoming notable fight. I go through a bunch of different stats and tangibles, you name it, and then I give you my preview and pick. And on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the UFC 282 featherweight fight between Bryce Mitchell, Ilia Topuria. But before I do that, make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. You do those three things, it really does help out this channel big time. UFC 282 taking place next Saturday, the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. We got a new main event. This fight has stayed intact, which is great. And it's a interesting one here between Bryce Mitchell and Ilia Topuria. Big things for the featherweight division. And like I always do, we'll just do a quick tail of the tape here. You can see they're both undefeated, although Bryce did lose one fight. I'll mention that in a second, a little bit later, I should say. 28 years old for Bryce Mitchell, 25 for Ilia Topuria, 5'10" to 5'7", 70-inch reach to 69. So there's a quick tail of the tape between the two. And we're going to start first with Thug Nasty Bryce Mitchell, who I did have a chance to speak with before this fight. You can find that interview on my UFC's interview playlist. And one of the interesting things was that they actually wanted to do this fight earlier, but I guess there was the weight issue with Topuria, so they ended up moving it and making it happen at 145 for UFC 282. So Mitchell, that was just one thing he mentioned, and a variety of other things as well. And another interesting thing about this fight that's just, again, you take it for what it's worth, but they both have the same management. They're both with first round. So that's another little sort of interesting tidbit when it comes to this fight. But let's start first with Thug Nasty Bryce Mitchell. You can see there undefeated. Oh, and other thing I forgot to mention, this fight is only 3 rounds. Big fight though for the division. Okay, so Bryce Mitchell, you can see there, 15-0 record. He doesn't have a single knockout victory. He's got 9 submissions and 6 decisions. He's 28 years old. He's 5'10" with a 70-inch reach, so he's going to have a 3-inch height and 1-inch reach advantage in this fight. Bryce Mitchell is a BJJ black belt. He's got performance of the night one time against Matt Sales. He's got fight of the night one time against Bobby Moffett. Bryce Mitchell made his amateur debut way back in November of 2013, a fight that he was actually submitted in the very first round. Kind of interesting looking back and the career he's had since then. So there you go, kids. If you're watching this, you can still lose a fight and still have a great career. Lose that first fight, I should say, getting it done there. And then he didn't have his MMA debut until January of 2015. Made his UFC debut in July of 2018. You can see there against Tyler Diamond. And he obviously was on The Ultimate Fighter as well, defeating Jay Cuccinello and losing to Brad Katona. So on that season, The Ultimate Fighter, some seasons they're different, but on that particular season, these, as you can see on Tapology here, were exhibition fights. And it was a huge upset at the time because Brad, as we know now, is a bantamweight, right? And so Bryce has been a mainstay at featherweight, so bit of an upset there. I'd be curious to see how that fight goes in a rematch. Brad having some success overseas with Brace CF, but Bryce has lost, just not technically on his record. Some people are sort of debating that, but yeah, that is a loss, but luckily for him, not one that is impacting his record here. Bryce in the UFC is 6-0. He's got 1 submission victory there against Matt Sales, but he's actually gone the distance a lot. You know, for the submission game of Bryce Mitchell, I think people forget he's only got the 1 submission victory. Some notable wins for Bryce in the weight class are definitely Andre Fili, someone who's been in and out of the rankings, and Edson Barbosa. That was a really big win for him, especially coming off a layoff. Really impressive victory there over Barbosa, who, I'll be honest, I remember going into that fight, I thought Barbosa was going to beat him, and Mitchell went out there with a great game plan and defeated him by decision and dominated the fight. So really big win there for Bryce Mitchell heading into this matchup. Bryce has no losses, like I mentioned, in the UFC, although he does have the exhibition loss to Brad Katona, like I mentioned there. Bryce had a few layoffs in his career. We always like talking about those. Going from the Tyler Diamond to Bobby Moffett fight, there was a 260-day layoff. I think there were some injuries there, some contract stuff. I'm not entirely sure, but so a bit of a layoff going from 2018 in July to 2019 in March. And then going from the Charles Rosa fight to Andre Fili, there was a 490, going from the Andre Fili fight to the Edson Barbosa fight, had this wrong in my notes here, there was a 490-day layoff. So you can see there, October 2020, he fought Fili, and they did not fight Barbosa until March of this year. And I know there was a hand injury. There was a variety of other things that kept him out of the cage, had some setbacks with the hand. He hurt his hand, obviously, outstriking Fili in that fight, and then ends up fighting Barbosa after that. So did make a note here that he did break his hand in the Fili fight, but it didn't matter against Barbosa because he went out there and took care of business. Okay, a couple close fights for Bryce in his career. You can see I mentioned there a total of 6 decision wins in his career, and the UFC's had a few as well. The Tyler Diamond fight, I went back and actually looked at that, and I was at that fight actually. That was the same card as I think Israel Adesanya and Brad Tavares were on that card, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, that's right. So majority decision win there. If you look at it, the media scorecards for that was in July of 2018. 6 media members scoring the fight for Bryce Mitchell, 1 media member scoring it a draw, and 7 scoring it for Tyler Diamond. I always find that interesting because, a fight like that, if it goes the other way, who knows where they'd be. Tyler Diamond right now, last I heard, he was in PFL. He's not been as active since then, and Bryce Mitchell, obviously a staple in the UFC. So just kind of interesting looking back at the decision for that fight. And then the other fight that some people felt was kind of close was the Bobby Moffett fight right after that. That was in March of 2019. 12 media members scoring the fight for Mitchell, 2 scoring it for Moffett. Again, most feeling like Bryce won, but there were still 2 media members scoring the fight for Bobby Moffett in that fight. So you can see there, Doug Nasty, Bryce Mitchell, one-of-a-kind fighter. Say what you want about everything outside the cage with Bryce. He's a talented fighter, and that's why he's getting this spot on the main card for UFC 282 and also getting a really big fight here against Topuria. Bryce, and it's actually interesting because both guys are technically undefeated, right? So someone's O has got to go in this fight, and that's what makes this so interesting. Okay, let's talk about Ilia Topuria, shall we? So you can see there, El Matador, 12-0 record. He has 4 knockouts, 7 submissions, and 1 decision. He is 25 years old. I think we forget how young he is. I even forgot that. He just seems older. I don't know what it is, but 25 years old, man. That is young in that weight class. He is 5'7" with a 69-inch reach. So the only advantage physically that, sort of on paper, that Topuria has is that he is 3 years younger than Bryce Mitchell. He's the number 14th ranked featherweight. Actually, forgot to mention Bryce's ranking. He's ranked number 9. So 14 taking on 9. Topuria is a BJJ black belt, and he's got a performance of the night bonus 1 time in his fight against Jai Herbert, which was his last fight. You can see there, Topuria did not have an amateur career. Made his MMA debut in April of 2015. Kind of interesting. Bryce Mitchell making his MMA debut 3 months earlier than that. So both guys debuting in the pro ranks of MMA in 2015. Very interesting there. Did not make his UFC debut until October of 2020. That was against Yusuf Zalal, which at the time was, and I remember seeing that fight and on paper and being like, okay, the UFC's trying to figure out who the better prospect is. Well, clearly it's Topuria because he's still in the UFC. Yusuf Zalal shortly after that getting released from the promotion. So very tough debut for him against Yusuf Zalal, a fight that did go to the decision. As far as notable wins go, you could maybe put Damon Jackson in there just because of the run that Jackson's been on, although I don't believe Jackson is ranked right now, although he's chomping at the bit there. But Ryan Hall at the time, 8-1, was doing quite well. And Hall doesn't fight that often, but Topuria just destroyed him in that fight. So we got to mention that performance because that was a really big win for him. That I think, people were impressed with him before from the win over Damon Jackson, but the Ryan Hall win, I think, really gained him a lot of respect just with what he was able to do with Hall, because we haven't really seen Hall finished like that in his career. And like Bryce Mitchell, it does not have any notable losses in the UFC. Now, Topuria has had a few layoffs in his career. If you look at the fight going from Damon Jackson to Ryan Hall, there was a 217-day layoff in that one. And then going from Ryan Hall to Jai Herbert, there was a 252-day layoff. Why was there a layoff there? Well, he had a weight cut issue. So first off, if you remember, he was supposed to fight Voliev, which too bad we didn't get to see that fight. I'm pretty sure we'll see that down the line. These two guys are extremely, talented fighters in the weight class. That was supposed to take place at UFC 270 earlier this year. And then he was supposed to fight Charles Jourdain instead. Jourdain steps up, but Topuria had weight cut issues. So he didn't even weigh in. I think they were just like, he's cutting too much weight. I believe I interviewed him right before that, and he seemed fine, but I guess, later in that week, he wasn't feeling good. So they basically pulled him from the fight. So he did not get to fight then. And then instead, he was given a fight a few months later against Jai Herbert at lightweight. There was no concerns about him making weight, obviously, with it being up a weight class, and did fight Jai Herbert in a fight that he got kind of lucky to win. Let's be honest here. Jai Herbert definitely rocked him in that fight, and Topuria was able to come back and win. Granted, up a weight class, but still made Topuria look a little bit human in that fight. And could it have been the weight? It's possible for sure, but it is one thing we have to point out. It was not a flawless victory there for Ilia Topuria against Jai Herbert in that fight. That was UFC London, and credit to Topuria as well. Herbert, obviously a UK fighter, going into enemy territory and getting the win there. I mentioned the weight cut issue there. One interesting thing I didn't realize with Topuria, going back and looking at some of his stats here, is that he's actually fought in multiple weight classes. So he's actually has one fight at bantamweight, which is interesting. That was way back. I'd have to go look again, but it was a while ago. He's had 2 catchweight fights. There was one that was supposed to be at bantamweight. He came in at 141 for that, and then he was supposed to fight for the Cage Warriors bantamweight title. And he came in at 139.4 for that. So that was he ended up winning that fight, but he did not claim the title because he missed weight in that fight. So just something kind of interesting that weight cutting is kind of, followed him around a little bit. He's fought 7 times at featherweight, and then he's also fought just the 1 time at lightweight against Jai Herbert in his last fight. Should also mention that Topuria was supposed to fight Edson Barbosa in October. He's out, and Mitchell was supposed to fight Ilia as well. So they kind of switched up the fight, and that's why we're getting Mitchell and Topuria fighting each other, because they both lost their opponents, Barbosa and Ilia, both of them there. And like you can see here, there's been no real close fights here with Ilia Topuria in his career. He's got 3 finishes, and the Zalal fight, I don't think anyone felt like Zalal won that. They felt like it was clearly Topuria getting it done. So no close fights there, no major injuries either, just the 1 weight cut thing against Charles Jourdain. Let's take a look at the odds. So you can see there, Bryce Mitchell, the underdog. I believe Bryce has been the underdog in a few of his fights here. Let me just have a look here. No, he was the favorite against Barbosa. He was the favorite. He was even against Feely. Was the underdog against Bobby Moffett, which is kind of interesting looking back. And he was the underdog against, opened as the underdog against Tyler Diamond, but eventually was bet up to be the favorite here. So a very rare situation where Bryce is the underdog here. And I think I have a couple theories as to why that might be. But Topuria, you can see almost a 2-1 favorite, not quite, about 165, 175, the average, about a 160 favorite for Ilia Topuria. I'll be honest, this fight is very, very tough for me to pick. I know initially when it was announced, I thought, oh, Bryce is probably going to win, but kind of thinking about this a little bit more, I'm just wondering how Bryce is going to win this fight. Okay, so Bryce does not typically, like we saw there, like I mentioned with the stats there, he is not finishing a lot of his opponents. He's typically going the distance. We know he's got a good ground game, but he's fighting a guy in Topuria who's also a black belt, who's also very good on the ground, right? And, had no problems with Ryan Hall in that fight. Granted, he didn't even get there because Topuria's stand-up is just so good. Bryce's stand-up has improved a lot. I was very impressed with his striking in both the Barbosa fight and the Andre Feely fight, but is that striking enough to defeat Ilia Topuria? I don't know. I think Topuria's striking is very, very, very good for that weight class. So I think on the ground, they kind of cancel each other out. I think they're both very talented, but I think in the stand-up, you give a slight edge there to Topuria in this fight. Kind of a bummer here, and not that it would be, because it's not like a number 1 contenders fight, but I kind of wish this was a 5-round fight. It's only 3 rounds, so that does make things a bit interesting. Whoever is going to be able to make a lot of, because I think this is one of those fights that I think could go the distance, just because of the durability factor between both guys. Neither of them have lost, and neither of them have been close to getting finished, other than Topuria, but again, that was up a weight class, so I kind of cut him some slack there as far as him getting rocked in that fight. Bryce does not have like 1-punch knockout power, so there's no threat for Topuria there. I mean, if Topuria was fighting, say, I don't know, just trying to think of someone like a Jakaze or someone like that has, some serious power, I'd be a little bit more worried about him in this fight. But Bryce doesn't really possess that. He's a good striker, but he's not a 1-punch knockout guy. Bryce has a good ground game, but like I said, Topuria very good on the ground himself. So I tend to think Topuria is going to win this, and I tend to think he's going to win by decision, because I just think Bryce's striking is on par, and I don't think he'll get rocked. Like, we haven't really seen Bryce get rocked. Maybe there's been a fight, but none that come to memory for me of him getting like significantly rocked. The layoffs are a little bit concerning with Bryce, the injuries, things like that. But I think in general, Bryce is someone that is very well-rounded. Another quick note on this fight, Bryce Mitchell getting to work with James Krause at Glory MMA. I think that's a good decision, just getting a different look from a different coach. I believe this is his first camp with Krause, so didn't spend the whole camp with him, but just did some cross-training from when I spoke to him. So that I'm sure will pay off. I know they're going to have a good game plan going in here. But yeah, kind of the way I see this fight going is I think Topuria is going to keep it standing. I think he's going to land the better power shots, and I think that's going to end up getting him the decision here. Again, 50-50 fight, and I just mentioned there that I picked Edson Barbosa against Bryce Mitchell because I felt the layoff and the stand-up would be too much for him, and Bryce proved me wrong in that fight. Well, mind you, he kind of wrestled Barbosa in that fight, but still, I was a little bit surprised there. But yeah, I think Topuria takes the decision here. I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be one of those fights that's going to be in contention for fight of the night. But I do think Topuria, just because his stand-up's a little bit better, I think he goes out there and gets it done. I don't think he knocks out Mitchell. Maybe he does, but I think Bryce's striking defense is good enough that he's not going to get finished early like Topuria has done to so many opponents. In fact, I think this fight probably plays out quite similar to the Yusuf Zalal fight to a certain degree, with Topuria getting a decision in this fight. So I don't know what you guys think in the comment section below. Who are you picking? Who do you think gets it done? More than happy to debate this fight with you guys, as long as you're not being disrespectful. That's kind of my rule, is just, I always like hearing different perspectives, but don't play that you don't know what you're talking about, you're a casual, that type of nonsense, right? We can have a friendly discussion here on YouTube. I believe in you guys. I know it's possible. I know we can do it. So you want to talk about this fight, more than happy to debate this with you guys. Follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at Lynch on Sports. Make sure you hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell. And like I always tell you guys in this video, if there's any other fights you want me to break down that are coming up, doesn't have to be a title fight, doesn't have to be a super notable notable fight. I am open to listening to you guys because I want to give you guys the content that you want. So just leave a comment. Let me know if there's another fight you want me to preview that is coming up in the next little bit. Just keep in mind though, any title fights, any main events, I typically do previews for those. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you guys soon. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.